authentic conversations about ourselves and our community, exploring topics that uplift and inspire us. From personal growth to social change. So grab your teacup and get ready to join the conversation.
Didn't get to see Kanye because he was in an overflow room. But in terms of being left alone, Kira, are you surprised? When you look at that video, the Intercontinental video, there's no running from it. And artists and celebrities, they wanted to run away from that because they didn't want to be associated with that type of violence. So it came down to money.
Bernarda, thank you. Aaron, want to take it to you as we reach the top of the hour here. We now wait to see if indeed the judge makes a decision. He says he will make it today if he will allow Sean Combs to be released and walk out those doors behind you.
The judge gave them several hours to make written arguments before he issues a decision on release on bail. But Sean Combs is already celebrating after he was acquitted of the most serious charges that he faced that could have sent him to prison for life. He was convicted of transporting people for the purposes of prostitution, but taking that as a win, even though in theory he still faces up to 20 years in prison, Kira.
And acquitted of the most serious charges. Bernarda, Brian, Aaron, thank you. We're going to return you now to your regular programming. For some of you, that is Good Morning America. But I do want to tell you about an ABC News special, Verdict, the Diddy trial, that will air tonight, 10 Eastern. Our coverage continues on ABC News Live and abcnews.com. The entire team will be here for World News Tonight with David Muir. I'm Kira Phillips. Thanks for staying with us.
Hi, I'm Diane Macedo, and we are following that breaking news. Sean Diddy Combs has been found not guilty of racketeering, conspiracy, or sex trafficking. He was found guilty of transportation for the purposes of prostitution. Court has now been adjourned as the judge decides whether he will release Combs today. I want to bring in ABC's Rena Roy outside court and News Entertainment contributor Kelly Carter for more. Rena, talk to me about the reaction here in the courtroom, really, when this verdict came down.
And this was an incredibly emotional moment. Sean Combs was visibly overcome with emotion. His feet were shaking under the table as the verdict was being read. Ground, kneeling in prayer when he found out that he had acquitted on the most serious charges, racketeering, conspiracy, and sex trafficking. He turned to his family and he said, "I'm coming home, baby." And there were loud cheers and applauses in the courtroom. We know that his family has been here to support him almost every single day of this trial. They actually just walked out of the golden doors of this federal courthouse here in Lower Manhattan just a couple of minutes ago. And there are a lot you can't see now because there's a bus here, but there are a lot of supporters here out here for him. Of course, people who also weren't so happy about this verdict. There's a lot of bloggers that have been covering this trial since day one, as well as all the media. We have been out here for almost 2 months at this point. Court is now adjourned for the day, but things are not over because the judge still has to weigh whether or not Combs will be released as early as today. That's what his defense attorneys are asking for, but prosecutors are arguing against that. So they both have several hours. The judge wants letters back from them making their cases at around 1 o'clock, and then we will potentially hear later today whether or not he will be released, Diane.
And I want to bring in our legal contributor, Bernarda Villalona, as well here on set with me. Bernarda, acquitted of the most serious charges, still found guilty of transportation to engage in prostitution. Each of those carries a maximum. Each of the 2 counts he was found guilty of there carries a max of 10 years. So what does the judge have to consider now, not only in terms of sentencing, but in terms of whether or not Sean Combs should be released today?
Sean Combs should be released today. He was acquitted of the most serious charges, and those also having to deal with violence. I was at his bail applications for the 3 times that he made a bail application. And the huge sticking point by the prosecution, by the government, is the violence itself, and that he was intimidating witnesses and still in contact and breaking the rules while he was in custody. Now, at this moment, those were allegations. Now a jury of his peers has spoken and has found him not guilty. So those are no longer allegations. So he should be freed. In terms of what the judge is going to consider is, 1, that he was acquitted. 2, that the sentence that he is facing, there is not a mandatory minimum. So technically the judge can even sentence him to probation or to time served. 3, whether there's a risk of flight, of him not returning to face sentencing date. That is highly unlikely, especially since Sean Combs knows what the exposure is, and also that for him to flee, it will give him a bigger exposure and almost guaranteed a jail sentence if he weren't to come back. So the judge should release him today. In terms of sentencing, now that's a long process there. The first thing that's going to take place is that the judge is going to order the Department of Probation to do a probation report and a probation interview of Sean Combs and do a deep dive into his background and ultimately make a recommendation as to what the sentence is going to be. Best believe that that intercontinental video is going to come back into light when it comes to sentencing, because the judge can take into account criminal acts that he wasn't convicted of when determining a sentence, a just sentence for Sean Combs. But given that he has a lack of criminal record in terms of something serious, it's highly likely that the judge will give him something under relation as to time served, or maybe just a few more months in terms of being incarcerated, since he was found guilty of 2 counts that technically can run consecutive.
Now, the prosecution has already said they're going to be seeking a severe sentence here, or a significant sentence. What do you think that means in terms of what they're going to at least try for?
Oh, I wouldn't be surprised if the prosecution doesn't ask for the max and ask for the sentences to be
just 20 years.
Yes, for 20 years, the max, because it's 10 years max as to each of these counts, and they can actually run consecutive. The prosecution is going to name out that, look, when it came to transportation to engage in prostitution, we're not talking about just 1 instance or 2 instances. During their closing arguments, they put up a photograph of 27 men that were actually trafficked as a result of doing these freak-offs and these hotel nights. So the prosecution is going to try to seek the maximum amount of sentence and also include those acts that he was found not guilty of in terms of that intercontinental video, and get statements from Jane and Cassie in order to try to move this judge to try to get the maximum sentence, which again is highly unlikely.
Bernarda, the defense argued throughout that all of the sexual encounters in this case were consensual. Does the fact that the jury found him not guilty of sex trafficking mean they agreed with that?
I wouldn't say that. I would say that the prosecution has to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. So just because a person is found not guilty doesn't mean that they necessarily said that they found that they weren't any freak-offs or that it wasn't consensual, but that there was some seed of doubt that prevented them from saying that he is guilty. When they say not guilty, it's not saying that they're proclaiming that Sean Combs is innocent. What it is that that person, Sean Combs, is being acquitted. That verdict says that the prosecution did not prove this count beyond a reasonable doubt, but not necessarily that they believe in their heart that Sean Combs didn't commit these acts and that it wasn't consensual.
And I want to bring in our chief investigative correspondent, Aaron Katersky, who's been at the court throughout this whole trial. Aaron, what sticks out to you about the way this verdict came down and the discussions that these attorneys are now having as they write letters to the judge about whether or not Combs should be released?
They have several hours now, Diane, to make the case whether Sean Combs should be released on bail. Combs himself offered $1 million bail, and the judge indicated to him that he did not want to go back to MDC, the federal lockup in Brooklyn where he's been held. And that's when he clasped his hands together as if to say, that's exactly right, Judge. And so the judge said he would decide today whether to release him on bail. Prosecutors asked for a few hours to put their letter in opposing it. He does still, as prosecutors point out, face the possibility of 20 years in prison on the conviction of transportation for the purposes of prostitution. And the way prosecutors see it, he's a flight risk and a potential danger. Even though they did not prove the sex trafficking or the racketeering conspiracy, prosecutors still told the judge he has a predilection to committing crimes, including violent crimes, and represents a potential danger, particularly to women. He also, we should say, Diane, faces at least 6 civil lawsuits that accuse him of acts of violence. We'll see where those shake out in the coming weeks and months, but Combs would no doubt like to try and fend those off as quickly as possible. Outside here, Diane, there is a crowd of supporters that looks like they're going to hang out to see whether he walks through those golden doors sometime this afternoon.
And I want to drill down on those civil suits with our legal contributor, Brian Buckmeyer, also here with me on set. Brian, I think it's in the realm of 60 civil lawsuits against Sean Combs right now. How does this verdict impact those cases?
Yeah, so about 60 or 59 civil lawsuits. I believe 14 of them involve a minor. And so the impact for those cases on this is somewhat positive in some lights, actually, ironically enough, and somewhat negative. The negative, obviously, in that he was found not guilty of the RICO conspiracy and the sex trafficking. So if there's any allegations that mirror that in these civil complaints, Sean Combs is going to feel very confident that he might be able to win those. But different allegations, different alleged victims. And I think, as Bernardo pointed out as well, there's a different standard there. And it comes to a criminal case, it's beyond a reasonable doubt, a much higher standard than the civil standard of preponderance of evidence, more likely than not, or 51%. But the reason why I say it could be potentially positive for those filing civil lawsuits is if Sean Combs was found guilty of that racketeering conspiracy, there would be a forfeiture application in terms of trying to dismantle that racketeering conspiracy, or that criminal enterprise, where the federal government would have had their opportunity to take money out of Sean Combs before the civil lawsuits would have had their opportunity. So in a way, Sean Combs may still have enough money in his pocket that those filing civil lawsuits might be able to find a victory through that process. I compare and contrast to, for example, the R. Kelly trial, where he was found guilty of racketeering conspiracy, and there was a forfeiture there, and many of the people filing civil lawsuits against R. Kelly found it difficult to win in those cases.
And I want to bring in Kelly Carter to talk about the cultural impact here, because, Kelly, it's hard to understate or overstate, I should say, the role of Sean Combs in music and culture in general. I mean, not only was he a legend in rap music, he was a legend in music in general, as a producer, as an artist, and then on to becoming a businessman with an empire. What does this mean for all that now?
I mean, I think it means a lot. The truth of the matter is that almost didn't really matter what the outcome was of this trial. The conversation changes immediately about what his legacy is. You know, this is a person who really touched every corner of pretty much every industry, not just music, not just spirits, not just fashion, politics, pretty much every industry he touched. He really ushered the hip-hop generation into the mainstream, into commercialism, and made it the multi-billion-dollar industry that it is right now. And I think, you know, regardless of the outcome, it's going to be difficult for people to unhear some of that testimony and to certainly unsee, you know, that infamous now Intercontinental video that was released with him and Cassie from 2016. And I think that it'll be interesting to see what his life is like as a businessman moving forward, but I don't expect to see something in the immediacy. And I definitely expect us to be dissecting his legacy for a good while now.
And we do have a statement from Cassie Ventura's attorney, Douglas Wigdor. He says, and I'm quoting here, "This entire criminal process started when our client, Cassie Ventura, had the courage to file her civil complaint in November of 2023. Although the jury did not find Combs guilty of sex trafficking Cassie beyond a reasonable doubt, she paved the way for a jury to find him guilty of transportation to engage in prostitution. By coming forward with her experience, Cassie has left an indelible mark on both the entertainment industry and the fight for justice. We must repeat with no reservation that we believe and support our client, who showed exemplary courage throughout this trial." The statement goes on to talk about her strength on the stand and to talk about the misconduct they say has persisted for decades without repercussion. Bernardo, I want to go to you on this point of what this means for future cases, precedent here. Does a verdict like this deter future potential witnesses in similar cases?
I think it definitely does. A verdict like this does deter victims and witnesses from coming forward. I think when you're talking about when the perpetrator is one of who has power, who has money, who had the key to the city, I think victims are looking at it, wait, if the prosecution gave it all they had and they went after him and they still didn't find him guilty, what about little old me? What about just regular perpetrator from down the block? What's going to happen in that type of case? So I think this is a huge deterrence for victims.
And Brian, I'm out of time, but I quickly want to touch on the way this case was brought has been criticized from the beginning. The actual charges they brought, the fact that it was a federal trial and so on. Walk me through that part of it. And do you think there are any legal lessons learned there?
I think there are legal lessons in terms of how to bring this case. I think for federal prosecutors, they've used the RICO statute in very creative ways. If you want to talk about R. Kelly, if you want to talk about Donald Trump, there have been people who have been in the spotlight who have bemoaned and said that this is not how the statute is meant to be. And I think this might be one of the first major setbacks in this use of the statute in this kind of new wave. And I think this is going to be, agreeing with what Bernardo said, but I'll add on to a reevaluation of how do we define RICO going forward? Who fits into a RICO? What is a criminal enterprise? And are we going to open or close off how we now progress or move forward in terms of evaluating should we use this statute for these different types of enterprises?
All right. Rena, Brian, Bernardo, Kelly, thank you all. And big thanks to Aaron Katursky, who again has been at that courthouse from the very beginning. Also, for more on today's verdict, catch the ABC News Live show Burden of Proof, the case against Diddy, streaming tonight at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. Meanwhile, the rough weather is complicating Republicans' race to pass President Trump's so-called big, beautiful bill. Speaker Johnson says the House could vote on it as soon as today after the Senate narrowly passed the bill yesterday. And now the president's planning to meet with Republicans at the White House to get it done. Let's bring in ABC News Capitol Hill correspondent Jay O'Brien and ABC News senior White House correspondent Selena Wang for more on that. Hi, Jay. So what's the latest on this potential vote?
Yeah, so we're still tracking a preliminary vote, a key procedural vote, the first hurdle for this bill as it's come back to the House. To be sometime this afternoon now. It was actually supposed to be as we speak, but that's been kicked a little bit into noon. So this is the vote on what's called the quote-unquote rule. The rule is what kicks off your ability to vote on this legislation in the first place. And what you're seeing there on the floor are members debating this rule. And forgive me as I scroll here on my phone, because I just caught up with Speaker Johnson not long ago. And I asked him, does he have the votes to get this over the goal line? Because right now, by our count, he's got at least a dozen in his party who say that they are either firm no's or they're weighing no or they're holdouts. And as you said, a number of them have shuttled back and forth from the Capitol here to the White House to be worked on by the White House to try to get from no to yes. Speaker Johnson said, quote, we're working on everything, but he wasn't necessarily clear that he has the votes in his column right now. Steve Scalise, the number 2 Republican in the House, also earlier today saying that this procedural vote, the one I was just mentioning, the one that's imminent, it's going to probably happen.
Things are a lot better than they were yesterday, Diane. Right now, we are seeing just over 300 cancellations nationwide. That is considerably lower than what we were seeing yesterday when we had those storms coming in through the Northeast. Even out in Denver and Las Vegas, as you mentioned there on your screen, a dust storm stopped.
An alarming scene as a fight.
Complain and her courage and her strength.
From now, and they are going to submit letters. Then there will be a hearing in open court as the judge decides whether to release Combs. The defense argued because he was acquitted of the most serious charges, he deserves release on bail. Combs offered $1 million, offered to put up his luxury homes, and certainly the court and everybody else saw these pictures of his opulent homes in Miami and in Los Angeles that were part of a case. Prosecutors opposed it, said Combs still faces the possibility of 20 years in prison, and therefore he should be held up until the time of sentencing, because it's still possible that he's going to be hauled off to jail, and he represents a flight risk and a danger otherwise because of a predilection of to commit other crimes, according to prosecutors. Combs told his family, I'm coming home, baby, after he was acquitted of the most serious charges. Applause broke out in the courtroom. If he does get released on bail, we're told he is going to walk through those golden doors and make a statement outside here on the sidewalk. It would be an incredible moment if someone who's been incarcerated for the better part of a year is able to win release on bail and able to talk about the outcome of this trial.
Kelly, Combs has had such a huge influence on the music industry and beyond. What did these charges do for that? And does this verdict change anything?
I mean, the charges, it's definitely a mark on his legacy, and I think it's a significant one. You know, I think it's noticeable that we're not talking about the parade of famous people and titans of industry who showed up to support him in court. So I feel like that is indicative of probably what we should expect his status to be in the business world that he left. And again, everything changed once that Cassie civil lawsuit dropped in 2023. I mean, we hadn't seen much of him since then, and certainly once he became incarcerated, we didn't see an outcry of support from the biggest names in Hollywood and in the music industry. So I do think that this changes things significantly for someone who, quite frankly, has been a cultural icon for 3 decades.
And Rena, I read a statement a little while ago from Douglas Wigdor, Cassie Ventura's attorney, talking about how critical she was to this case, how it all started with her civil complaint and her courage and her strength throughout this trial. But I know he also spoke outside the courthouse. What is he saying about her reaction to this verdict?
Diane, there is no question that Cassie Ventura was key in this case. Doug Wigdor spoke just a short time ago outside of court here, saying that Cassie Ventura is in a good place. He says that she's happy with this outcome. They would have, of course, preferred a guilty verdict across the board, but they say that they're proud of her courage here. Take a listen.
The reaction is that we're pleased that he's finally been held responsible for 2 federal crimes, something that he's never faced in his life. He still faces substantial jail time. Of course, we would have liked to have seen a conviction on the sex crimes in RICO, but we understand beyond a reasonable doubt is a high standard, and we're just pleased that he still faces substantial jail time.
Now, Wigdor also said that he's proud of Cassie for shedding a light on this, saying that she had paved the way for other alleged victims to come forward. Remember, he is facing nearly 60 civil lawsuits at this point, so his legal troubles are far from over, Diane.
And Aaron, let's drill down on that a little bit. Where do those civil cases stand right now?
Well, they're all pending. There are more than 6 of them alleging all sorts of things. Some seem to be more credible than others. Some named plaintiffs, some not named plaintiffs. But Combs is going to have to reconcile with all of them. Most of them seek monetary damages primarily, and he's in a better position to fight them now, although there are some differences should any of them go to trial. The standard of proof is less in a civil case, preponderance of the evidence as opposed to beyond a reasonable doubt. And if they do go to trial and Combs opts not to testify, unlike in the criminal case, in a civil case, the jury is allowed to make an inference about why a defendant would choose not to testify. So it would work a little bit differently, but the focus now, Diane, is clearly on the possibility.
All right, we know what the state of Diddy is now as far as the verdict goes. Diddy's ass was convicted of 2 of the transportation and prostitution, not the ex-trafficking and all of that, coercion and force stuff. Okay. So we're going to keep the tea pouring on Diddy for the day of the verdict. Maybe a sentence will drop. We'll see. But we are also seeing if he'll get bail, right? Because Diddy proposed to get bail. So let's tap into Salon Crime and see what they're dropping tea on Diddy. This is outside the courthouse. Okay. Everybody's still pretty hot on Diddy, even though he was found guilty and not guilty at the same time of 5 charges.
Here yesterday as this partial verdict came down, which frankly for a lot of us was a shock that they would get this far. And I don't think I'm being over dramatic by saying that
jury instructions in and of themselves were very complicated. So you have to look at all of the breakdowns of these crimes, understand each one specifically, which is why they've had a few questions going back to the court. So I think that they are really hung up on a couple of things. One, understanding the law. Number two, understanding what RICO means and how it really feels for them. Because I've spoken to a lot of people who could potentially be jurors at any time, right?
Kind of made their decision already in terms of counts 2, 3, 4, and 5. And so I was like, okay, is Sean Combs going to come inside the courtroom? Is he going to have that same kind of tone that he had yesterday? But it kind of was a little bit different, Chris, in that he came in, he was all smiles, especially when he initially saw his mother. He spoke to her initially just kind of walking into the courtroom. He did what he normally did, was kind of do the little hearts, talk to his mom a little bit. He was coming in with smiles, notably. And then after he gave the heart sign, he sits down, he reads kind of this note or this letter for a little bit. And then it seems like he was either writing something down, jotting something down. I'm not sure because his arms were kind of covering his body position. So I couldn't see if he was like writing a letter back or kind of what was going on there. But then for a moment, I saw kind of the defense kind of all huddled over into a circle area, just kind of talking things over. But the prosecution wasn't inside the courtroom. I was thinking, okay, maybe a note hasn't been received. The jury is still continuing their deliberations after they started around maybe like 9:05 this morning. And then I saw the defendant kind of chatting with Xavier Donaldson for a little bit. Then Combs was kind of sitting alone for a little bit at the defense table. And then again,
as you're processing how all of this played out, as someone who covers
Pro Diddy are definitely happy about it.
And I know we talked about when we signed off at the end of last hour, when Diddy's kids left, you saw his sons, his twin daughters, they got in that Sprinter van and they headed out after praying with their dad. And then he goes to wait out the jury deliberations. I know his mom and his sister were in the courtroom 10 weeks. It is inspiring. You worked together, rain or shine. You answered the call of public service. That should give
30 to 60 days from now. In the meantime, both sides will marshal their arguments. They will put forth sentencing memorandum. The defense counsel puts together a memorandum. The prosecution puts together a memorandum. And also the probation department, the pretrial services, they also put together a memo. They will interview Mr. Combs. They will, each of those three branches, if you will come up what they believe an appropriate sentence is. And then ultimately it's up to the judge to formulate whatever sentence he sees fit in this particular case.
And we'll get some reaction. I'm still waiting to get the description of what the courtroom was like in this moment with Sean Combs being found guilty on the most serious charge of racketeering conspiracy. But Candace, as you look at the not guilty verdict, what could the prosecution look back on and think maybe we should have done that to build a stronger case to maybe get a conviction on this?
Listen, the prosecution put on a very good case. Let's remember that there were no witnesses that the defense even chose to put on. They just said, you know what, you didn't make your case. The prosecution, I would think, if they were going to look back, I don't know, would they do something with Christina Coram? Maybe take that chance. Would they do something with this plethora of security guards that we know were within Sean's orbit that knew everything? Because we know Sean wasn't driving himself to places, Sean wasn't getting candles, and Sean wasn't picking up Astroglide. Are these the people that we should have heard from? Because certainly being in the gallery, these are the people that I wanted to hear from. Would they have provided some glue to any of this? I think that that's something to take into consideration. Who were the people that we have heard all throughout this trial, but we didn't bring? Could they have made a difference?
I want to bring our Sierra Gillespie in right now, who's outside the courthouse. Sierra, what is the vibe there?
I mean, I'm telling you, Chris, this came out of nowhere. No one was expecting that after 1 hour worth of deliberations, we would have a verdict. So much so, the P. Diddy's family left the courthouse. They thought they were probably going to go get some brunch or something, and all of a sudden they're turned around. So I'm telling you, the instant that people were able to show up, I'm shocked by it. There's a major crowd outside of the courthouse. I mean, I have no idea where all of these people came from just to surround and hear all of this. And I mean, I think the vibe is that this is a pretty big win for P. Diddy. I mean, not guilty on count 1 of racketeering. Huge win. I mean, that could potentially throw the life sentence out the window. And you can definitely tell in the crowd here, people who are pro Diddy are definitely happy about it.
And I know we talked about when we signed off at the end of last hour, when Diddy's kids left, you saw his sons, his twin daughters, they got in that Sprinter van and they headed out after praying with their dad. And then he goes to wait out the jury deliberations. I know his mom and his sister were in the courtroom, but Did you see them get back? Were they there for this verdict?
I believe so that they were. And I'm telling you, straightforwardly, everything was a mess when we heard the verdict. Elizabeth Milner got up, ran inside. I jumped in, plugged in my microphone and my IFB, ready to go. So it was almost like a frenzy here. You can kind of feel the vibes. And that's what I'm trying to convey to you all, by the way, that here everyone can kind of feel the vibes that something wild is going on. I did see the commotion behind me. I did see the Sprinter van, but honestly, I was plugging in during all of this, so I didn't physically see them with my eyes, but I do believe that they were there in the courtroom.
And if you're just joining us here on Law and Crime on the live stream, it's great to be with you. We have a verdict in the trial of Sean Diddy Combs, and I want to read through this verdict for you once again, just so we're all on the same page. The judge the deputy, in the matter of the U.S. versus Combs, count 1, juror number 5, the foreman says not guilty. Sex trafficking of Cassandra Ventura, not guilty. Transportation for prostitution, guilty. Sex trafficking of the victim that went by the pseudonym Jane, not guilty. And then transportation for prostitution of Jane, guilty. Have another court update coming in. The judge asking the media not to question jurors about their deliberations. Jurors, you can contact our chambers. You gave up a lot these 10 weeks. It is inspiring. You worked together, rain or shine. You answered the call of public service. That should give us hope. The judge then says, I need to address a few matters with the lawyers. Then I will come back to meet with you, jurors. All rise to the jury. Then the jurors then exit the courtroom, and the judge says, I'll hear any application then about sentencing date. Combs' attorney, Mark Agnifilo, says he should be released. Combs Agnifilo says he is no longer charged with sex trafficking or racketeering. His plane has been chartered. It is in Maui. He does not have access to his plane. This is his first conviction, and it is a prostitution offense. He should be released. William Corman, criminal defense
So it's
attorney.
very likely that Diddy will be released on bail, being that none of the serious charges are pending or he's facing them any longer. He's not facing them any longer. So that's a possibility, y'all. What do you think? Do you think Diddy will make bail? Do you think they will give Diddy bail?
As someone in this line of work, how strong of an argument that is that Sean Combs should be released?
The problem is this. Combs has a significant amount of assets, and if Sean Combs chose not to come back to court to be sentenced, he would be able to do that. So again, correct, he has no criminal record. Correct, he's been found guilty only of the lowest hanging fruit, as we've been calling it.
Also, being that Diddy has no criminal record, how do you think he will be sentenced? Let's ask Siri. If a person has no criminal record and are convicted of 2 charges of transportation to engage in prostitution, what is their likely sentencing? Based on federal law and recent cases, a person with no criminal record convicted of 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution under the Mann Act could potentially face a maximum sentence of up to 10 years in prison for each count. Therefore, with 2 counts, the individual could be facing a maximum potential sentence of 20 years in prison. However, the actual sentence will depend on various factors considering by the judge, such as the specifics of the case, the individual's lack of criminal record, and the judge's discretion. Important considerations. While the maximum penalty is 10 years per count, legal experts suggest a starting point under U.S. sentencing guidelines might be a range of 15 to 21 months for such conviction. So Diddy might just get 2 years for each count. The judge ultimately determines the final sentence, which can be within or outside of the guideline range. Having no prior criminal record could be Thanks for watching. Remember to show your support by liking, subscribing, and sharing. It's a blessing. Keep your teacups filled and ready for my next upload. Until then, stay inspired and remember, always stay gift giving.